When I was a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, one of my favorite shows, playing on repeat and reruns, was The Twilight Zone, created by Rod Serling.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
It was a well-written show where characters find themselves dealing with disturbing and unusual events that usually ended up with an unexpected plot twist and a moral to the story for everyone to ponder as food for thought. Remember that episode called Escape Clause? It's an episode about dealing with the devil gone wrong and becomes this lesson about the careful reading of contracts. Or the infamous To Serve Man, where aliens trick humans and transport people back to their planet, not for tourism, but for food. It's a lesson about never judging a book by its cover. We are living in interesting times, to say the least. It kind of feels like a Twilight Zone episode sometimes, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to know what is true and what is fiction. As a kid, the show was one of my first exposures to this idea of critical thinking, which by definition means the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. But critical thinking alone doesn't always get us to the truth. As it turns out, we humans are not naturally born with this gift of being objective. We really have to work at it. To think critically, we must be aware of our own biases and assumptions, and then apply consistent standards when considering the sources. But sources are tricky too. I remember a time when I believed what I saw on the news. I remember believing that doctors got into medicine just to help people. I used to believe that my religion put God's true church on earth, and my church leaders upheld the highest standards of honesty and would never lie or do anyone harm. Now we're in this era of AI and deepfakes. Have you seen fake Tom Cruise on TikTok? In 2021, a company called Metaphysic worked with a Cruise lookalike named Miles Fisher to create super convincing videos of Cruise playing golf, dancing, and other activities. Of course, it wasn't really Tom Cruise. It was just his face digitally mapped onto Fisher's, but the videos fooled a lot of people. Deepfakes are here, and they are really good, and only getting better, or worse depending on how you see it. How can we know what is true? And by the way, I'm not talking about this idea of my truth, which is my version of my personal experience, however valid or important. My truth, or your truth, still may or may not actually be the truth. Do you see how confusing it is? It's not just the technology. We humans are born with what's called cognitive biases, and there's a million of them. There's the action bias, anchoring bias, the bandwagon effect, choice overload, confirmation bias, Dunning-Kruger effect, hot hand fallacy, hyperbolic discounting, the illusion of control, loss aversion, the spotlight effect, the sunk cost fallacy, and many, many, many more. These biases are often subtle and even insidious at times. If we're not careful, we become like dogs barking up the wrong tree, or like Linus from the Peanuts gang, a devout follower with the highest level of faith and the best of intentions, confessing our time, talents, and money to the great pumpkin, who actually never ever shows up. Confirmation bias is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of our own existing beliefs and theories. Imagine that you believe that right-handed people are more creative than left-handed people. I'm right-handed, by the way. Whenever you meet a person that is both right-handed and creative, you'll bank this as evidence that supports what you already believe. Assuming that you're not a narcissist, normal people like you and me dismiss facts every day in what's called cognitive dissonance. I'll bet you've probably even done this a few times today. Cognitive dissonance is this mental conflict that occurs in our brains when our beliefs don't line up with our actions. It's uncomfortable when someone confronts us with different values or opinions about the same thing. We saw this a lot during the pandemic, or we see it during elections, but it's also as simple as normal stuff like getting healthy, let's say. Suppose you want to get back into shape, but you don't exercise enough and you only eat junk food. You feel guilty, sure. Eating donuts or drinking too much soda is not productive, but you do it anyway. This is dissonance. You might even justify your actions by explaining to yourself and others how important a cheat day is, for example. After all, someone with your willpower needs a cheat day to be productive. Anyway, you can decide what's true or delusion here. This episode with Neil deGrasse Tyson is not about trying to break your shelf or dissuade you from your deeply held beliefs. It's about learning more about critical thinking and the scientific method so you can figure out what is real and what is fiction. For you to be a better truth seeker and not be caught up in the trap of groupthink. For the record, I believe, based on my experiences, similar to what the French philosopher said, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. What comes after this life, I have no idea, and I'm at peace with that. I have only recently rediscovered one of the most credible sources of truth and light. It's been within me all along. And if I had any advice, I think that's a pretty good place to start. Here we go.
I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, your personal astrophysicist, and right now you're watching Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Today I'm here with the incomparable, the amazing, the incredible Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil, welcome to the show.
Oh, sure. Thank you. That I don't need all of that up front. Let me earn that by the end of the show, and then maybe someone can think some fraction of what you just introduced me as.
That sounds fair. All right, so let's do a little 20 questions here. Have you ever played the game 20 Questions?
I guess so, or variants of it. 20 feels like a lot of questions, though. But yeah, and but the premise is that my answers are short and pithy. So that'll be my challenge.
Yeah,
I surely have 20 answers. It's whether we can finish that and still have time for the rest of the show.
Good point. Yes, they are supposed to be short and pithy, and they'll be rapid fire when we edit in post. But this is a game I remember playing like on road trips when I was like 10 years old. Anyway, so here goes nothing. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
20 questions with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil, what's the hardest part of being you?
It's trying to understand what everyone is thinking and how their brain is wired so that I can best communicate what I need to them. That is my biggest challenge in the day. Otherwise, I'm just lecturing, and that's not really communicating. So I put it there.
What's one thing you can't live without?
Ice cream. Ice cream and books. Ice cream and books.
Yeah. What's a talent that you have that someone wouldn't normally know about you?
I like origami. I've liked it my entire life. And I don't think I've ever told that to anybody at any time. But my skills have diminished over the years, but your basic stuff, I can still knock those out. And
interesting.
Including the bird that flaps its wings as it goes by. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to learn. I want to hear more about that. How you learned that. What are you really bad at?
Yeah, that implies that you try to be good at it and you're bad. There are things I don't try to be good at. I already know I'm not good at them. Maybe in another life I will focus on it. But it would be composing music. I'm bad at that. And one day I want to be good at it, but in another life. I'm too busy in this life. But I value that talent in others.
Okay, now we're going to Fantasyland a little bit. So, like, if you could trade jobs with any CEO, or not CEO, just if you could trade jobs with anyone in the world for maybe 2 weeks or a month, just sort of dip into their world, do their job, who would you like to trade jobs with?
An Olympic marathon runner who wins, and they're the first back into the stadium. That's got to be a feeling like no other that there is after running for so long and so hard, coming out at the head of the pack, and 50,000 people stand and cheer.
I like it.
I'd trade that for a day.
Who is someone living or dead that you'd like to maybe have dinner or drinks with?
Oh, Isaac Newton. No question about it. Except I think about that often, and I realized how difficult that would be. So I have to ignore all the difficulties, because he'd say, well, how'd you get here? Oh, I drove a car. And he says, well, what's a car? And I say, well, it's a horse-drawn carriage without the horses. Well, then how does the carriage move? And I say, well, it has an engine. And he says, what's an engine? Well, it runs on gasoline. Well, what's gasoline? Well, okay, we have a battery version of it. What's a battery? And there's no, then you realize how long ago he was, regardless of his brilliance. It would still take a lot to have a meaningful conversation about what's going on in my life.
Well, let me do a follow-up question with Sir Isaac Newton. What would you ask him then if you had just one question to ask?
I would try to assemble a problem that we face today and couch it in a way that he can understand it, and then see if he can bring some insights that no one today would be able to accomplish. Because he brought insights in his day that no human ever born before him could do. So I think there's a lot of unrealized problem-solving abilities that we could benefit from if we let him know what challenges we face.
Okay,
But he'd be a fast study, by the way. He would pick it up quickly. It would just be a lot of front-end investment to get him up to speed.
So then it begs the question, what is the modern-day problem that Sir Isaac Newton ought to be looking at?
I would say we need a different kind of battery. We're using batteries today, and batteries were invented 150 years ago. And it's one of the last remaining 19th century technologies that are still infused in our 21st century lives. So maybe he'd find another way to store energy that we can then recover from later. But then I'd have to explain to him what energy is and how it's quantified. And because energy was not a fully developed concept at the time he was discovering the laws of optics and gravity and inventing calculus. So that's a challenge, a nice, interesting physics engineering challenge that I think he would rise to.
Favorite vacation spot?
I say Iceland.
Favorite food?
Pepperoni pizza and a strawberry milkshake. I could go to Mars consuming those foods for 9 months and not be concerned about I wouldn't miss any other food. And plus, if you look at the nutritional value, it's quite it's high in protein, fat, carbohydrates. The vitamin. I may have to supplement with a vitamin or two, but I'm good with that all the way to Mars.
I like it. Do you have a pet?
You mean an animal?
Well, could be a pet rock, I suppose. Could be a pet rock, I suppose. But
yeah, no, I grew up with a dog, but I don't have a pet now. Haven't had one since then.
Besides your own,
and by the way, I love dogs. I walk dogs and earned money. Bought my first telescope, my second telescope, and a camera and darkroom equipment, because that's how old I am. Back when photographs were created in darkrooms, so I have a long history and appreciation for what dogs are to our lives. But no, I don't have a pet now.
I love dogs too. Thank you for sharing that. Aside from your own books, what's your favorite book?
Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels.
What is your spirit animal?
I'm particularly fond of the cheetah.
Okay.
And just because of how fast it runs, one, how graceful it looks while it runs, and it's to be fond of the cheetah, but how about the antelope? That just got snared. It's kind of fun if an antelope or whatever it is that it's chasing does a sort of an impala. It wouldn't be an antelope; it would be an impala, of course. It does a sort of fast, there's a zigzag, and then the cheetah just tumbles because it's not as nimble as the impala. So I would say my spirit animal is the cheetah.
Okay. Who has made you the most starstruck? Like when you've met someone for the first time, who's made you the most starstruck?
All considered, I would say Richard Dawkins. I'd read his books, deeply impressed with his knowledge, his capacity to communicate, his command of the language. Plus, he's Brit trained, so he's got those extra words that we don't even know exist that make a sentence perfect. And I first met him like on a panel on a stage. And then I had something critical to say about something he did. And I was particularly nervous about that because I passed judgment on some of his educational tactics. In fact, it's online, but you'll see me sort of fumbling over my words, and I'm as inarticulate as ever, simply because I'm a little bit nervous, a lot nervous. And here's someone who's, like I said, whose books I read and who I deeply respected, yet I had something critical to say about him. I was concerned that he was a bit too acerbic in his interactions with people who he is trying to convince
Right.
of that their thinking is astray or wrong. And I just thought that he's turning them off. He has much more power of persuasion than is represented in his actual interface between himself and the public. But anyway, I was really nervous then. But I'm not otherwise nervous. I've been, presidents and things and royalty. And so for me, the nervousness is just being in the presence of someone who I know has great intellectual mass, if you will. And I value that.
Yeah. So, you straddle between academia.
Oh, by the way, I've since become good friends with him. So,
yeah.
With Richard Dawkins. Yeah. And so,
sure, there's a mutual respect there.
And I still deeply respect, I have no less respect for him now than I ever have, even in that moment.
I bet that goes both ways. So you straddle between academia and entertainment in many ways. What have you learned about yourself from being in business? So that could be in the business of academia or the business of entertainment or somewhere in between. What have you learned about yourself from, earning a living this way?
Oh, I learned that there's no such thing as a balance in life. People come up to you and say, what's your life-work balance or your play, joy? And that question has embedded within it the assumption that not only is my life balanced, but that a balanced life should be what we all strive for. And I'm not here to value judge that as a goal, but I can say that a life out of balance is one where you are continually having to innovate in how to get things done on time, how to retain the quality of your work, your focus, your concentration. And to lead a balanced life, I think, is overrated because it means the challenges are diminished because you've struck this perfect balance. And without the challenges, I don't know that you're fully rising to the levels that you can. Yeah. And so that's what I learned about myself. I don't seek balance. I just seek new and innovative ways to get the job done, no matter what that job is. If it's with the public, with academics, with my writing, with my podcast, Star Talk, all of these are tugging on me. And also family, kids, wife, the whole thing. It's all there. And it's not quite a juggling act. I think that diminishes what is going on. I would say it's an organizational exercise daily.
Yeah, the only thing constant is change. I like it.
Yeah.
Today is Blur's Day. Do you have a nickname?
Yes, but I won't share it because I use it to getting in and out of security questions. So You don't get to know my nickname.
Got it.
It's a nickname I had as a child, and no one calls it to me as an adult. So
we'll ask.
Plus, Neil has only one syllable, so it's hard to turn Neil into a nickname. But I can tell you that my baptismal certificate, since there is no Saint Neil, when you're baptized, there's got to be a saint's name there, which I think is, who came up with that, right? But anyhow, there are a lot of saints. So I'm actually Cornelius, Saint. So I'm Cornelius deGrasse Tyson on the baptismal certificate. but I'm born Neil. Yeah.
I like it. What is your definition of a perfect day?
Oh, a perfect day is a day where I spend quality time at home with family. I watch a good movie. It could be a movie I've seen already. I don't mind that, or a good new movie. I also have read some very old books that reveal how people used to think about the world, and I like tracking that through time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a nice bottle of wine with a nice candlelight dinner, although I don't burn many candles anymore, but a romantic dinner. And then and that day I might exercise a bit so that it pumps the muscles. And so it does a little bit of everything that I enjoy most. And then that day becomes a very full and fulfilling day for me. And I have to make sure I learn something. Otherwise, the whole day is wasted.
Good point. What makes you mad?
Yeah, I don't think about that.
What gets you frustrated?
That's a better word. Yeah, anger is something. I guess some people get angry, and I don't. Maybe if I am, I don't think that I am. So maybe I'm delusional. But frustrated when I see people who have capacity for thought. First, because they're human, but second, because you hear other things that they say and comment on, and yet they're completely off the rails with conclusions they draw from what they think. And it saddens me because these are full-grown adults behaving this way, people who are certain in themselves that Earth is flat or that Earth is 6,000 years old. There are things that they're in steep denial of. And I think as an educator, there's some missing capacity for analysis that could have been instilled within them in school and was not. And so as a result, they come out as an adult, a victim of anything that sort of sounds good and feels good that they want to be true, and they thus declare it so. So I'm frustrated by an educational system that graduates people that end up thinking that way as adults. Notice I'm not blaming them. There's a whole other system in place where you can graduate from high school and say, I have a high school graduate. Well, do you realize that you still read your horoscope and believe that Mars matters in your life? Yeah, I know it does that, but I'm still a graduate. No, you're not. Go back to school. No, you have not learned how this world works.
There might be some people who are confused between the difference of astronomy and astrology. You're right.
Well, but I use it as the simplest of examples of how someone can believe something is true that is not. And science is all about deciding, making sure you're not fooled into thinking something is true that is not true, or thinking that something is not true that is. All right. Both of those are two sides of the same scientific coin that we carry with us, that any inquisitive scientist carries with him every day.
Yeah. What was your very first job?
I was a camp counselor, a junior counselor at a sleepaway camp. And I was pretty young, and I think I was overworked. I mean, child labor laws would probably prevent what that was. Back then, I worked for 2 months and was paid $150. And I was doing things like hauling seaweed out of the lake that people swam in, and removing paint from walls. And I was like all around person. Much less of that time was as an actual junior counselor with campers. So it was basically child labor. I'm pretty sure of it. And I worked pretty hard for that $150. But I was young, and $150 meant a lot because I was young. Plus, it was a long time ago. But still, that was my first job.
Okay, back to Fantasyland a little bit. You give me a glimpse of Sir Isaac Newton, but I want to ask, if you had your choice to live in any era of time, what time period would it be?
It would be the future, because progressive thinking is an arc. To quote Martin Luther King, it bends towards justice overall, not day to day, maybe not even month to month, but certainly decade to decade. And so if you are a woman in this world or a person of color, there is no time in the past where you were treated better than you are today. There was no time, unless you insert yourself into the aristocracy, for example. So the historically disenfranchised groups include LGBTQ. I mean, that doesn't matter. If you were disenfranchised socially, culturally, politically, your best time is not the past. It will be the future. And so, no, there is no time. There's no romanticized time. Gee, I wish I was back in the 1800s. No, I'd be somebody's fucking slave. Okay. Yeah. Oh, how about 80 years ago? No, I'd be shining someone's shoes in the street. 70 years ago? No, I'd be carrying your luggage onto a train and you'd be calling me boy, even if I was an adult who was older than you. So no, take me to the future.
Yeah. So then that begs the question, how far in the future would you like to live? Are we talking about?
I want to see forever. I want to see forever. I want to see what new inventions can modify how we live. I want to see what new medicines, what new technologies, what new.
How much time? Give us an estimate of. Do we need 500 years to get there, or?
Oh no! Just on my deathbed, I'll say, "Gee, I wish I could see some more of the future than I have."
Yeah.
And 30 years is a nice interval of time.
Okay.
A lot happens in 30 years. There's several doubling times of discovery and advancement that takes place within that time frame.
Yeah.
So 30 years is a nice bit. I mean, look at 30 years ago. All right. What didn't we have? Well, there's no Facebook. There was no YouTube. There was no, people were still renting VHS. I think DVDs were slowly coming on. Might have been full of DVDs by then, but now you look at a DVD, it's like, what is that? Right? Why don't you stream it? Right. So people live completely differently over 30-year periods. What was 30 years before?
You forgot the popular mullet. We don't have the mullet anymore.
Yeah, styles is a whole other thing, clothing and hairstyles. And my afro was a little bit bigger back, if you go back enough time. But 30 years ago was 1990. Go 30 years, and that was just right at the birth of the laptop, right? You go 30 years before that, it's 1960. All right. We don't have a spacecraft that can even carry people into orbit yet. No one does. So 30 years before that was 1930. It was the deepest part of the Depression. So for me, a good 30 years can tell you a lot.
I like it.
500 years. Yeah, that'd be another amazing thing. Yeah.
If you could take lessons from any expert, what would you learn and from whom?
Yeah, I would maybe get acting lessons from Meryl Streep.
I like it.
I have a few cameos in a couple of movies and TV shows, and you really cutting me some slack because it's a cameo and that I'm not an actor. That's the only reason why cameos work. It's like, oh, Neil Tyson is that he's an astrophysicist, and he's clearly not an actor. So I would get it from the best, or from her, from Judi Dench, or from there's some actors where you enjoy anything you see them in, and they just command the screen. Maharishi Ali, these are people, they come on, it's like, everyone quiet. Okay. And what's good about them, unlike some actors you always know it's them while they're doing their thing, but there are others where they just absorb the character they're trying to be.
Yes.
And you no longer say to yourself, oh, I'm watching this actor act. You're watching this character get portrayed. So I could pick up a few pointers and be a little better in my role when I was in Zoolander 2, or when I was in Batman versus Superman, or so I think that'd be fun. It'd be fun to get inside the head of a highly experienced actor.
What are you afraid of?
I'm afraid that humans, I'm rational enough so I don't fear the dark. I mean, plus I'm an astrophysicist, so we embrace the dark. I tend to be a realist, a practicalist, if there's such a word. I fear the future of our species I fear that we don't have enough wisdom to wield the power that our science and technology will give us, so that future generations can be proud of who and what we were, bestowing this world upon them rather than embarrassed by the state of the world that we left for them. So I fear that. That's fear.
Yeah.
And I try every day to make that fear go away. And the only way to make that happen is get out there and say, this is what you're doing to the ecosystem, to the climate, to the energy balance, that's my way of trying to not be afraid of the future.
I would have also accepted spiders.
Oh yeah, no. I'm as from early on as a child, I was way too rational to be afraid of the normal things one would be afraid of. So yeah, no.
Final,
And what's the one where you're afraid of being in front of an audience? The anxiety. No, it was never any of that.
final question. How would you describe yourself in 3 words?
I can do it in 2 words. Oh, okay, 3 words. I'm insatiably curious.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to say a quick thanks to all of you who've taken 5 seconds to click the follow button on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you listen. You have no idea what a difference it makes. More followers helps us bring you more of the highest level of guests and wisdom to help you grow your brand. I'm the underdog, and yet with your support, we're able to compete and attract some of the same A-listers that go to podcasts where the host is being paid hundreds of millions of dollars. It's incredible. The difference here is there's no ego, politics, or other drama nonsense. My goal is to be your eyes and ears, asking some of the smartest people on the planet the kinds of questions you want to know to take your game to the next level. Thank you so much for your support. This episode is also brought to you by my friends at Plunge. Some of you know that when I met Wim Hof, the Iceman, he was instrumental in helping me cure my chronic migraines with cold therapy. I first discovered cold plunging on my journey to better health about 3 years ago. I was getting pretty serious migraine headaches from a combination of poor sleep habits, inflammatory foods, work-related stress, and dehydration. I had no idea what was going on. I was miserable, couldn't function at work or home, and none of my doctors could figure out how to solve my problem without addictive pain meds. I started slowly with cold showers and immediately felt the benefits. I knew I needed to take it to the next level and started cold plunging. I focused on optimizing my sleep, fitness, nutrition, and it all started coming together. I have probably saved over $20,000 in medical bills staying healthy and fit on this protocol. How much would you invest to feel amazing? For me, the investment in a cold plunge to feel like me again was priceless. I've lost weight, I'm more mentally awake and don't need coffee or Red Bulls, and I'm doing my best to live a longer, healthier life to be with my family. That's what I want. My friends at Plunge just released the all-new, all-in unit, which is totally redesigned and full of upgrades. Use my code BRY, that's B-R-Y, to get a better price when you buy it. Just go to plunge.com and check out the all-new, all-in, as well as their beautiful hot sauna units available now for pre-order. It's been one of the best investments I've made in my health. I guarantee it.
Neil, I usually ask my guests, how did you get this job as an astrophysicist? How did you get this job?
Oh, my specific job profile, if you want to call it that, it was not in response to an ad that said we need the person with these qualifications. And there's a lesson in there, by the way, I think. It's if you have a portfolio of what you do best and no one knows that they want it or need it, you can get hired for some of what you do best, and then they see the rest of what you can do, and then they say, can you do some of that for us? We never even knew that was something that could be done or that could be done that well. Let's do some of that too. And so what then happens is your job description morphs to shape what you do best for the benefit of those who can justify paying you for precisely those features. So I count myself among the ranks of socialized people in the world. And some of that I go back to elementary school. I was a pretty sociable kid, to the point where teachers were complaining on my report cards about my social energy. And I think back then, maybe even today, when, what is a teacher's example of a perfect student? It's someone who doesn't disrupt the class,
Yeah.
who is silent while the teacher is speaking, who
Conforms.
gets good grades and conform to all the rules that are put in place. And I wasn't very good at that. It was a bubbling of social energy. So here's a social energy that I now use, that I bring to bear on my podcast, my Star Talk podcast.
Yeah.
And if I'd had that beaten out of me or encouraged to leave me so that I could silently listen to a lesson plan and then spit it back in an exam, I'd be a different person today. Mm-hmm. So I stuck with what I enjoyed and what I did best. And I think if you're lucky, that can be valued in some way, shape, or form out there in the real world. Did Elon Musk fulfill a job description in his current job? This was a space company looking for a CEO and he applied? That's not how that worked.
Yeah.
No. Also, I spent time, this is on the side, not many people know this, I'm a big fan of calligraphy. I have many sort of fountain pens that do interesting calligraphic lines. And because not all fountain pens give you an interesting line. Some are just sort of prestige symbols that stick out of your pocket. Almost every fountain pen I own a few dozen, but almost everyone I own, it will give you an italic line or copperplate, sort of a palace script kind of line. And I carry at least 3 pens with me when I travel. And one of them is what I would use if people want me to sign one of my books. And so the signature is not just a Sharpie or a ballpoint. It has some flavor interest to it. And I value when other people value that I have valued that. And because it's in their book, and it makes it a little more special for going through the same motions, basically. So here is something that I did that maybe I should have been paying attention in class, but I wasn't. My doodling was practicing my F or my R. Or my capital G, which has some difficulties in it, and especially a capital S, if it's scripted or if it's Gothic. So there's some complicated letters, and I work on those, the kind of letters you'd see in an illuminated manuscript that monks would have done. And so I just find it fun that you could do this with a pen. And there are times I probably should have been doing other things, but I was doing that. And now it manifests, like I said, at book signings, and people extra appreciate that. And I appreciate that they appreciate it. Another thing, I remember, I should have been studying for a physics exam, but I was playing with a Rubik's Cube, trying to solve it. I probably blew 40 hours within 3 weeks when I know I should have been studying. And I finally solved it. And I've never looked at instructions for a Rubik's Cube. Not to this day, I haven't. So the solution is just what I came up with in it. And this ended up being a bit on Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, because he had a Rubik's Cube just in the green room, and I started playing with it. And the show was over. It was already filmed and everything, and there was time to leave, but I was still trying to solve the cube. And the whole staff was completely intrigued by this fact that I delayed everyone. I finally solved it. He created a piece the next day about me being distracted by the Rubik. And that's just a fun little thing. And it was because I was doing a thing, just because I was following my own star, if you will, my own compass. So if you do it and you get good at it, maybe whatever it is, maybe someone will notice. And then you get to shape a life that derives from what you like and what you do best, rather than being forced into what someone else needs out of you.
I love that advice. It's magic. I want to go back and just sort of underscore a few things that I heard, so that if the audience missed it, because it might have been subtle, I want to go back to this idea, which is, many people have talked about it. Picasso said, everyone's born a child. And we sort of forget how to be creative. I think about Sir Ken Robinson, who was also on this show and became a friend of mine, who talked about how we need artists just as much as we need astrophysicists, and dancers as much as we need mathematicians. It's all important. And then I started thinking of this metaphor of the calligraphy pen. Like, I think it's a beautiful piece of advice to tell people to be a calligraphy pen in your industry. In other words, don't just be a ballpoint pen that does his or her work, but like, be this calligraphy pen that's sort of special and does it in a special way, your way, whatever that is. I think it's really smart advice. Really good. Love it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of a calligraphy pen as metaphor, but if we're going to sort of keep running with that, there's, of course, when you practice calligraphy, you are aping something else that has already been conceived and thought up about the strokes and how you connect letters and the angle that the text makes to the horizontal. And so, but once you've done that, then you have this ability. And if you do it with multiple sort of fonts, if you will, then you can make up something of your own, or you can just be expressive in whatever way you want because you have that ability, because you were training into yourself. Once you got through the formalities, the creativity is what tops that, what takes you beyond the rules.
Yeah.
Because what is something that has been created, but it's something that no one had thought of before. That's what creation is. And if all you do is what everyone has thought of before, you're an imitator. And there's a lot of room for imitators and a lot of money to be made, but you can't count yourself among the ranks of those who have moved the needle on the creative spectrum into the future. So yeah, I'll go with you on that, and I'll add something else.
Yeah.
Just because you started this. If you write a letter by hand, we are so many layers removed from what that act once was. And what I mean by that is, if let's say I'm writing a love letter, and just the word love in script, it's the L is beautiful, and the O and the V and the E, and that's sandwiched between other words that give further meaning to how you're using that word. The flourish that you put on the page can capture emotions beyond the strict definition of the word you just wrote you just wrote down. So if you think about communication as a word with an idea that's predefined, then there's the way that you write the word that communicates extra dimensions of emotion. And I think that's what the monks were trying to do with the illuminated manuscripts. All right. How did you feel on that? They're transcribing the Bible, and the Bible is a very deeply felt thing for those who are religious. And if you don't capture that in how you're writing this, go home, take up another job. So we do this, but then the typewriter gets invented. And so now you just sort of hit a key, and that's the L and the O and the VE. So now you've removed any human attempt to layer emotion onto those words, and now you're stuck with the pure dictionary definition of what they are. Okay, well, that's what books always were. So, okay, fine. But now I can say with words how much I love you or how much I feel for you. So now I have to put in some extra words. I can't rely on my flourish for this. All right. So now I throw in some extra words there. And so now what do we have? We have emojis. Okay.
Symbols, yeah.
It's symbols. So if you feel for someone and you don't have the whole vocabulary of a romantic sentence, just up comes, a smiley face with a little heart, kiss heart or something. And so that is so far from pen and ink on a page that I wonder, but I'm not, by the way, it might sound like it, but I'm not value judging it. I'm just observing it. I wonder in the future, what will happen to written communication? Will it just go away entirely? Will there be a select few, the few poets and novelists who they're this, they're in a cave somewhere. They're the only
Yeah.
ones, the keepers of written expression. I don't know. But
Well,
occasionally I think that.
I'd love to talk a little bit later about AI. Elon Musk is trying to develop Neuralink, and we have digital downloads, both that can go in and maybe go out. Podcasts are capturing and documenting information. That's fascinating to me. I'm also curious about your parents. Like, did they see something in you early, or did they say like Neil should be a professional baseball player, or you should go into law, or be an accountant? Like, do they try to steer you into something specific when
I
you
have
were
a brother
younger?
and a sister, and they never tried to steer us.
Mm-hmm.
They always gave us space to explore,
Yeah.
to discover on our own what we want to be when we grow up. At no time was there pressure to be what they were or what they weren't, because that can happen both ways. So I would never made it to a medical doctor, but my daughter is going to be a medical doctor, by golly. No,
Yeah.
there was none of that. There was none of this pressure, but we were fully exposed to things adults can do beyond the doctor, lawyer, Indian chief list that you're handed at the time. By the way, I have a book called Neil's School Years, where I store my report cards from third grade onward, and they're check boxes. All right, and early on, it's what do you want to be when you grow up, and they give you a checklist, and so in there was policeman, fireman, baseball player, this sort of thing. And I wrote in astronomer, okay, because there was a write-in. But they separated boys and girls. So the girls section was stewardess, secretary, mother, and I thought it was odd that the woman had the choice of being mother, but the man didn't have a choice of being father. So this is sort of the gender socialization that was going on at the time.
Yeah.
And I even knew that. And this is in the 1960s, because that's how old I am. I didn't fully absorb how insidious it was, but I knew something was wrong about this. So, and again, I think they were just trying to be innocent. Just it's your school time. It's what it was. And maybe they were being frankly realistic. Is the little girl going to be a surgeon? All right. Growing up in the 1960s, what are the chances of that? All right. Yeah. So, but you never know how much this socialization was a fulfilling of its own destiny. All right. You say, well, you can't because that's how things are, but you have an opportunity to change that, and you're not in this one little book. So,
well, I think if I could just interrupt and say,
oh, please interrupt at any time.
That
that's only my evidence that I have that you're paying attention, is when you interrupt me.
Well, I just think that it's appropriate to say that representation matters, and I think that you're living proof of that. Or any of the female founders that we're talking about today, or the first African American president, or the first female vice president, or all these areas where there wasn't representation before, where there currently is representation. Or if you want to look at a very, very young person who is the loudest voice in climate change, that's representation. So there's lots. Representation matters. I think it's important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I forgot why I went there.
I was asking you if you had early influences, if your parents steered you in a certain direction.
Oh, my parents, no. So they didn't. No, but they took us to museums, art museums, science museums, the aquarium, went to baseball games, to hockey game, to an opera, to plays, to musicals. Yeah. So every weekend, maybe 2 weekends out of a month, but it felt like every weekend, my sister, my brother, and I, my parents, we drank in the cultural offerings of what it was to live in New York City and grow up in New York City. And it's those early exposures that allowed me to see, I don't like that, but I like that. I want to do more of that. Mm-hmm. And it's this kind of thing. And I would later learn that this was highly calculated on their part.
Yeah.
And so once they saw the interest, then they would nurture it, but they would not force it.
Yeah.
So I knew I was interested in science from age 9, really taking Taproot by 11, and they were supporting it from that early on.
I love it. And I asked that with context because I think whether you're a parent or you are a child who's grown up trying to figure out her destiny, what she's supposed to be great at, I think signals are really important, and sometimes we miss them because we're so close to it. Maybe we're really good at accounting, but we hate it, or we're incredible at baseball, but it just makes us miserable. Whatever the criteria is, the signals are important, and if a good parent can pick up on those signals, be very deliberate about helping a child, or even someone who's late teens, early 20s, try stuff on for size to see what fits and what doesn't. I think it's super, super helpful and productive.
Yeah, and I think if you have a choice between doing what you're good at and doing what you love, you should do what you love, because
Agreed.
eventually you'll get better at it for having loved it, and you may become better at what you love than anything you were previously good at that you didn't.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of my first reflection there. But also it's possible to engage in a subject. You get deep enough, you say, no, I'm not really interested in that. And then you move on, and you might say, well, I wasted 2 years. No, you didn't. You learned what you didn't like, first of all. That's knowledge. Second, you learned a little bit about something that maybe would show up later, would plug in to
Absolutely.
something you do later. And this is why, for me, I analogize that to a library, right? You can walk into a library. I bet most books in most libraries will never be checked out ever. But the person setting up the library doesn't know that. You don't know in advance what books might never be checked out. So you got to put it all there so that someone comes in and then they pick the one book that might not have been checked out were it not for them. And that leads them to a new idea that transforms the world.
Yeah.
So
if
your life is a journey, constantly picking up bits and pieces of things you learn, you do not know in advance how you're going to put all that together and make a life out of that. And it may be that you needed all those pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that you created for the very first time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I testify. I mean, I can tell you so much that I learned from the most mundane jobs or the worst bosses. Nothing goes to waste.
Right.
I want to transition a little bit, jump right into the deep end of critical thinking. You said some things that have really resonated with me recently and over the years, of course. I guess let's start with, how do you train your brain to think differently? Because I find myself getting stuck. And when I say stuck, it means that maybe it looks and feels like confirmation bias. Like, I easily agree with myself. And I think maybe also, nothing's wrong when maybe there is, and I just don't know it. So how do we train ourselves to think differently? Because it's a brain issue, I think.
Yeah, I don't think you can. I think you have to. Let me be more clear about that, because that sounds very defeatist. In my time in school, you mentioned something earlier. Let me just put it to rest here. At no time in school did anybody, not the least of which my teachers, ever tell me, you're going to go far. No one ever said that, ever. So I was not riding on the confidence of grown-ups, declaring based on whatever it was they were observing that I'm the one they should watch and move forward. And so to say that first. Second, by the way, it's not that I didn't have deep interests from very early on. It's not like I was a late bloomer. It's not like I was still trying to find why I should go to school. And so, no. I was deeply in this from a very early age.
Why don't you think people could see your brilliance?
Oh, because they based it on grades, and I had a B average my entire life.
Okay.
I had some A's, B's, and C's, and it averaged out to B.
Okay.
And we're not in a system that believes that the person who performs that way is the one who should give a commencement address, or is the one who the teachers will say, that's the one who's going to make it.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we look around an actual society and you get people like Bill Gates and Michael Dell and Jim Cameron and Elon Musk and all these people, and none of whom graduated college. They
Right.
were either dropped out or never attended. And yet they're shaping the world in which we live. So there's clearly a disconnect between the metrics that are invoked when people are trying to decide who's going to succeed and who isn't, and who actually makes a difference in this world. Yeah. And I'm thinking deep and hard about that because I want to sort of come out with some very strong statements in the coming years related to that. But sorry, I distracted myself by going there. Where was I headed?
Well, I was just going to compliment that idea.
Oh, yes, how do we think differently? Sorry.
Well, yeah, but I was just going to say, I think it's important to say that, literally and metaphorically, we're measuring the wrong things. And
no, we're measuring a thing. It's just no. I want to be clear. Okay. I have nothing against exams, standardized exams, grades. Yeah. I have nothing against that. But if you want to believe that the straight A student is going to lead the world and the B student or the C student is not, then there's a flaw there.
Yeah.
So I don't mind the measurements, but add other measures that can give someone confidence that maybe they'll amount to something in life.
Yeah.
And so I just by way of anecdote, my verbal SAT scores, it was like, okay. It was like, I forgot the percentile, but it was anything anyone would say, hey, watch that person. They're going to, no, it was okay.
Did that light a fire under you at all? I just kind of looking back through history, and I remember anecdotally.
Oh, I just didn't care what people said. So it's not a matter whether it lit a fire. It's a matter of its irrelevance given my own ambitions.
Okay.
So I knew what I wanted and what I cared about, and there are people passing judgment, and sometimes they're between me and my goal. So I just find other ways to get to the goal. Yeah. You climb over, you go around, you dig under. Yeah. And so what was my point there about
you were saying that school is one measurement, grades are one measurement, but not.
Oh, yeah. So I don't mind you measure it. Just don't believe that that's the one indicator of what the rest of your life is going to be or should be. Yeah. The same goes with like IQ tests. Oh, you got this IQ, so therefore we're going to give you all these opportunities and you're the one who's going to discover the cure for cancer. Like, no, they're not. Okay. You're hoping they are because you have this measure and you think that's where it's going to happen.
Is that
it may be, wait a minute, it may be that person becomes a wealthy philanthropist who funds the research that ends up finding the cure for cancer. Right. And you're not even thinking that way. Okay. So it's the assessments that people are making, the judgments they're making about your future promise and performance based on the metrics that somebody else has established for you. So that's my objection here. It's an issue by way of anecdote. So my verbal score was okay. All right. I forgot the percentile. It might have been 85th percentile or something. It was above middle, but no one is saying, hey, okay. So what is it? Let's fast forward 15 years from that. 15 years, I'm a columnist for Natural History magazine, at the time published by the American Museum of Natural History, a monthly columnist. And I get a letter in the mail from the Educational Testing Service, Princeton, New Jersey. These are the purveyors of the SATs. By the way, that used to be called the Scholastic Aptitude Test. Mm-hmm. Okay, aptitude, that implies if you do high, you have high aptitude, low, you low aptitude. So that was marking you, mm-hmm. It was branding you. Mm-hmm. And so they would ultimately change what those words mean. So it's now the last I checked, Scholastic Assessment Test. It's very different to assess someone than it is to declare that it is your aptitude. Right. So that's a start in the direction that I think we were headed. But anyway, I get a letter in the mail just to show you what kind of a grip they have on us all. It was like, what happened? Oh, my score is not good. This is like 15 freaking years ago in the past. So I open it and it says, Dear Dr. Tyson. Okay. Dear Dr. Tyson. We read recently one of your essays for Natural History magazine, and we seek your permission to quote from it for an upcoming SAT we are writing, and we want to include this in the reading comprehension section in the verbal part of the exam. And I didn't quite know how to receive that. Is it, well, thank you, or is it fuck you for me getting this score where no one is thinking I'll ever become a writer, because writers are not drawn from that pool. Right. And even if they would have been, they're discouraged from it because no one is pushing you forward. But I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed putting word to page. I enjoyed communicating in this way. So I didn't care what the score told me. And I knew I had much more learning time ahead of me outside of school than I would ever have in school.
Right.
So if you're a lifelong learner, your access to knowledge and information and wisdom and insight can become manifold greater than anything any teacher was ever assessing for you while you were in school. So of course I gave permission for this. And they might have even paid like $100 for it. I have to dig up the letter. But for me, that's the best evidence of the mismatch between what role ambition can play in someone's life and the power that people who have over assessing who and what you are and will become have over you.
Yeah.
So that was, I think that was addressed one of your questions that you put on the table.
I like it. I mean, I think we get stuck in this linear thinking. Either we listen to what other people say about us and what we're capable of, or they judge us on what we've already done, not what we feel capable of doing. Let's go into talking a little bit about.
By the way, it's bad both ways. All right. People who are always saying you won't amount to anything. People who are saying, maybe your loved ones or your family, saying that you're the greatest. All right. So both are bad if they're not representative of a reality that will ultimately matter to you as you go forward. So I think your own assessments become important. Make your own measurements of how much you know relative to others. And I think that's, otherwise you become this pinball getting batted around by the comments and opinions of others.
Yeah. And I think about some of these iconic, heroes from the past, people who have shunned the naysayers, whether that's Albert Einstein or Walt Disney or Martin Luther King Jr. or Steve Jobs or Elon.
Yeah, everyone successful will have stories about people saying they will never be successful.
Yeah.
Basically, this is, I don't say everyone, but so it is so frequent that we really have to take stock of what the hell is going on between school and adulthood.
In fact, I would say that when you hear that, it's good news that you're probably on the right track. Like, keep going. If someone says it's impossible, you can't do it, you'll never achieve it. Like, oh, good. This actually might happen. That's actually maybe good news. Right?
Well, you asked if does it make me stronger or work harder? No, I don't depend on the comments of others in any way for this. Well, what I do, however, I do have an enormous literature, especially from the 19th century into the early 20th century and the eugenics movement. I maintain a literature of anthropological declarations of the superiority of white people, white men specifically. I'm intrigued as I read that, watching how people used to think, what they said about women, people of color, people, Asian people. You said, what gets me mad? That can fire me up.
Yeah.
That can say, all right, what next should I prove today? Just to further bury these ugly chapters in the history of academic science. Okay. These were members of the academy doing this. And it fed Hitler's Nazi Germany regime. If anybody could be at the top, and scientists are saying it so, well, clearly the Germans are at the top. All right. And they have superior technologies, and so there it was. And the ugliness and the pseudoscience that derive from it. So yeah, that can fire me up.
Yeah.
And I reach in, I can just close my eyes, reach for any book, and there it is.
Yeah.
All right.
Injustice is a trigger for me too. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Let's talk about some of these. How do we find truth with some of these things that are difficult to prove? I mean, on the lighter side of things, because I grew up in the 80s, I saw E.T. and I saw, I've always been fascinated with aliens, and whether it's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Wars, and you've talked quite a bit about aliens.
I love the aliens. Nobody doesn't love the aliens.
Yeah, I mean, and we should applaud the fact that we have another robot on Mars. It's mind blowing, and then bringing it back on Earth. I'm also sort of a closet fan of Bigfoot. Like I'm a Bigfoot. Like I want to believe that Bigfoot exists, but I don't have empirical evidence, or maybe I do. I just don't know it. And also, if you talk to a higher, more ethereal kind of concept of God, you've talked about a lot of these things, but how can we find truth where it's not super easy to prove? What's the method?
So first you have to remove the word proof from your vocabulary. The word proof has very specific meaning in mathematics and in certain branches of logic where you can prove that something is true or is not true. In science, we don't go around proving things. We go around demonstrating that something is objectively true beyond any need to further experiment with it. So objectively true means I make a measurement and I get a result, and you make a measurement of your own design and you get the same result, and so do 10 other people. And there'll be variation among those results because our apparatuses differ a little bit, and you're a little sleepy when you took your measurement, and I'm fastidious, but too fastidious, and I measured the wrong thing. So there'll be variations in what our results are, but if the results generally agree, that is a new and emergent scientific truth. You put it in the textbook and then you move on.
Yeah.
So truths are established, as we have come to recognize in the last 400 years. 400 years ago was basically the birth of what we now think of as modern science.
Yeah.
Where you have an hypothesis and then you test it, and then you test it again, and then test it again, and jiggle it and then test it again. And only when you have consistency of results can you then declare that something is a particular way. And I'm happy to call that an objective truth.
Can I ask you something specific then about an objective truth? So Stonehenge, right? So you talked a little bit about it. You danced around it, like toying the idea or teasing the idea that the earth is only 6,000 years old, et cetera, et cetera. That's a common Christian belief. But like, I was seeing something.
But just to be clear, that's in the Old Testament, which is Jewish, and which the Christians also embrace. So anyone who's Old Testament based and fundamental Orthodox will say that the universe was created in 6 days, not much more than 6,000 years ago. So it's not specifically Christian because Jesus has nothing to do with that.
Thank you for that clarification. So I want you to comment on, so Stonehenge, I can't remember if it's 12,000 years old and they just recently found, like in the last decade, this excavation in Turkey, right? Where they found all this incredible sort of Stonehenge-like structures. You know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, I just caught the headline of it, but I didn't dig deeply into it. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And so they estimate that civilization, and there was carvings on the monoliths and whatnot, very similar to a Stonehenge, but they estimate that it was like maybe 10,000 years before Stonehenge. So that predates Stonehenge by 10,000 years. So the idea that civilizations were this many years old now is like pushed back another 10,000 years. So if you were just to speculate, like in terms of, well, we know the Earth is what, billions of years old, maybe? Like, so what do you think is is there a probability that we're going to find older civilizations even predating that by 10,000 or 20,000 years? Like, how far back do you actually think it goes?
So there are multiple things going on in your commentary there and question. Yeah. So let me unpack it. So first of all, what is science? You get the best evidence available and you test a hypothesis. Oh, I think Stonehenge is older than 5,000 years. Oh my gosh, I found some carbon remains, carbon dated. It puts it at 10,000 years. Wow, and where was that? It was under one of the stones, or it was nearby, or
Right.
oh, I found some other culture that was nearby that has some writings, or had not writings, but has some carvings. So you piece together, because you don't know the answer when you're on the frontier. You're like touching the elephant, all right, and a part of the elephant, and you don't know the entire elephant. So
Right.
you do this, and then if you do it responsibly as a scientist, in that case it would be anthropologists, archaeologists, do it responsibly, you would say all evidence points to this structure being this age.
Right.
Now, that's just my result. But you're a competitor of mine. You say, I don't think so. I think it's more modern. I think it's older. You go there and you check. I got the same answer as you. And I was looking at different stones. Then a third person checks it. We're good here. Okay, Stonehenge is 12,000 years old, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
We're good. So now the statement responsibly offered is the oldest known civilization on Earth is 12,000 years old at Stonehenge.
Right.
Fine.
Yeah,
So wait a minute. So now
Yeah.
you're digging around in Turkey or somewhere else in the Middle East, and some stones rise up. I always wanted them to find Stargate in the sands, but they're not. And now this is 15,000 years old or 20,000. So now we have an older civilization. Fine. It doesn't negate the discoveries and the dating of the Stonehenge that had preceded it.
Right.
It expands an understanding into a greater truth. Okay? In the same way, Newton's laws of gravity, this is the simplest example of what you just described, but I'm bringing it back to physics briefly. Newton's laws of gravity and motion explain everything he saw in life. The moon around Earth, Earth around the sun, a running horse, an arrow through the air, a tossed object, all of this. And then we find out that at the extremes, Newton's laws are failing. Something's going wrong, and we don't understand what. And it was not until 1905, so we're now 200 years later, and 1916, that Einstein comes forth with the special and general theory of relativity, which are improvements upon the theories of motion and the theories of gravity. Improvements. Right. So now, does it shove Newton off the table? No, because that had already been experimentally verified and determined by multiple people. This is my point.
Yeah.
Newton was in the 1700s. That's 100 years after Galileo in 1600, where the methods and tools of science were honed. So what happens? Einstein develops this, and you know what happens? If you put low speeds and low gravity, because Einstein gets you the Big Bang, it gets you black holes and all this weird stuff in curved space-time. If you put in low speeds and low gravity in Einstein's equations, they become Newton's equations.
Mm-hmm.
So Newton wasn't wrong. Newton was incomplete.
Yeah.
New science broadens and deepens our understanding of things.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're not going to go back and say Newton was wrong, because it was experimentally verified to be correct in the conditions under which it had been tested. We're not going to go back and say Stonehenge is now 50,000 years old, or it was made in the 17th century. That's not going to happen.
Right.
Because the methods and tools of science were brought to bear to establish an age date for it. But nobody was saying this, unless they're delusional or Eurocentric. They're not saying, here is the oldest civilization in the world, Stonehenge. And it happens to be my backyard, and I'm British, and I care about my own culture. Well, that's your bias coming in. All right. And if you're a good scientist, you have to check your bias at the door, because if you don't, someone else will.
Yeah. So I want to go back to deep space. I want to talk about your belief.
But you were asking about objective truths, and I'm just simply saying, in science, our path to truth is through the results of experiment and observation.
Yeah.
And you want Bigfoot to be running around the forest. And so it's very hard to demonstrate a negative. It's very hard. But it's possible to amass enough evidence so that to continue to think it's true would be untenable. Okay? So, for example, we have hikers everywhere throughout forests and woods and things, and everybody's got a smartphone. And every smartphone can take high-resolution video, high-resolution stills of anything, even in low lighting situations. So what you have to say to yourself is, if Bigfoot, given how Bigfoot is described, it's mammal. If it's mammal, that means it reproduces sexually, which means there has to be at least two of them. And if it's still around, presumably it has not lived as long as when it was first talked about, so it would have offspring. So if you have Bigfoot, you'd find maybe Bigfoot poop somewhere.
Or bones. Yeah.
So, or bones, or you would run, or someone would have run into Bigfoot and taken high resolution video of Bigfoot. But when you wiki Bigfoot, the best evidence is a fuzzy, monochromatic 1966 or 67 video of somebody walking in the woods. So your best evidence is 50 years old. Given that we upload 6 billion videos and photos to the internet every day today, it's untenable, I think, to continue to believe that Bigfoot lurks in the woods of the Pacific Northwest. And I will add to that, by the way, we are discovering, I don't know what the number is, hundreds, if not thousands, certainly hundreds of new species of life and plants every year. Okay?
So you're saying there's
none of them are huge macroscopic mammals. Okay? They are tiny. Okay? So humans have mapped the Earth. We got this.
Yeah.
All right? The surface of the Earth, there's no new terra incognito, whatever that's said on the edges of the maps. There's no more places like that. Okay. We've got this. We've got satellite images. Is what kind of life will elude us? Maybe something at the very bottom of the ocean, sure.
Right.
But something on land walking around that's a mammal,
10 feet
big hairy
tall.
ape. Yeah, I'm thinking no.
Yeah.
So take that as an absence of evidence in support of the absence of the object or of the creature.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to do that and then move on. And if you're going to say, well, prove it, no, I'm saying go take up mathematics if you want to prove things.
Right.
In science, we amass the evidence or recognize the absence of evidence to draw a conclusion and then move on.
Okay, so let's take that same style of thinking and apply it to God or your definition of God.
I don't have a definition of God. Other people do, but I don't.
A higher power.
Odd that people can define God.
Yeah.
Given the powers they ascribe to God, the idea that they can actually define God intrigues me. But go on.
Well, so how do we apply the same kind of critical thinking to a higher power? If we think, about the traditional story of why we're here, where we're going, a binary, there was a then, now there's a now, and then after there will be something else. How do we apply that kind of critical thinking that you just did, that exercise with Bigfoot?
Well, so if you look up God in the encyclopedia, Wikipedia, they're rolling pages of all the gods that have ever been worshipped in the history of civilization. So given that we're having this conversation in the West, in the United States, I'm presuming you are meaning the Judeo-Christian God when you say God.
Yeah. And
if not, then I can answer slightly differently. But if you specifically mean the God of the Judeo-Christian Bible, I can address that. But if you were thinking God as an all-powerful being that created the universe and is looking after you, we can say, what is your evidence that this entity is looking after you?
Right.
There are many pious people out there who are stricken with cancer, or 30,000 people die in car accidents every year.
Right.
In 1755, was it, in Portugal, Lisbon, Portugal, one of the holiest cities in Europe, on All Saints' Day in the morning, when most people are in church, an earthquake struck.
Yeah.
Killing 10,000 people outright because the largest structures in the city are churches.
Yeah.
And the most susceptible to collapse in an earthquake are the
how
largest structures. Wait a minute. And after the earthquake, a tsunami followed.
Yeah.
Killing another 50,000 people. 70,000 people were wiped clean off the slate that morning.
Right.
So if you want to say your God looks after you, there's strong evidence against that. If looking after you means that God is interested in your health or your longevity. If you want to remove health and longevity from the equation, and you can say they look after you in life and in death, well, then go ahead. Then your God is there.
Yeah.
And God will kill 80,000 people in the morning who are all worshiping. That's God's will. That's fine. But then you're not offering me a test for the non-existence of your God.
Well,
if anything that happens is fair enough for your God. So then you have to remove the methods and tools of science from your belief system.
Yeah, I'm willing to go.
If that's how you think about it. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
No. I'm willing to go there. I guess when I pull back and I zoom out, just, me as a kid or even as an adult looking up at the stars, the solar system, the planets, to me, it's remarkable that the solar system, the planets, even beyond that, which I have no knowledge of to the depths that you do, I'm sure. I just look at the spherical, brilliance of the planets, or the way that everything interacts perfectly, or the way it's sort of automatically set up. To me, in my feeble brain and my feeble thinking, I think, well, maybe there is a creator, someone who designed all this, a great designer. Did this all just happen by happenstance, or, through the process of science over billions and billions and billions of years? It just seems too perfectly designed. In some ways, I'm a designer doing what I do, and I marvel at it, just how perfect it is.
Yeah. So that urge to think that way is strong. It's deep.
Yeah.
And it is fed the history of people's urges to invent religions, to become participants in divine teachings. And so you are not alone if you think that. But what you need to do is just look a little more closely at the natural world. Oh, wait a minute. An asteroid struck 65 million years ago and rendered 70% of all life forms on Earth extinct. Well, where'd the asteroid come from? Well, there's a belt of asteroids that has hundreds of thousands of asteroids in it, and tens of thousands of them are wayward, and their orbits cross the orbit of Earth. So, in fact, we live in a shooting gallery. Mm-hmm. Oh, is that the perfect design you're talking about? Or maybe not. I don't know. Oh, Earth is still cooling from the heat. By the way, okay, if you're religious, you don't say Earth formed in this way, but I'm telling you, objectively true, that Earth still has heat left over from its formation and being generated by radioactive decay of, among other things, aluminum in our crust. But that has rendered the layer below Earth's crust liquid. And Earth's crust is moving on this liquid, creating earthquakes and tsunamis that follow them and volcanoes wreaking havoc on Earth's. But this is a perfect world you're talking about. Oh, excuse me. Okay, it's perfect. All right. Well, what else? We have viruses that their only job is to infect and make more copies of themselves.
Yeah.
All right. How about the bubonic plague? Read about the 14th century, the only century in the history of human civilization where the ending population was less at the end of that 100 years than it was at the beginning, because of the devastation that Black Plague wrought on especially Europe, but also other parts of the world. Is this the perfect world you're talking about? Oh, okay. What else is happening here? We have storms, hurricanes that wipe whole cities clean. We're a little better at it now once we've learned. Mm-hmm. Okay, but still, what about childhood leukemia? Oh my gosh, where did that come from? Birth defects, just cancer in general, something we have yet to solve, but it's a perfect world to you. There's stars that explode, wreaking havoc on their environment. There's a famous story by Arthur C. Clarke, science fiction story, about a civilization that just escaped their planet. I hope I'm not merging more than one sci-fi. There were short stories. I could be merging more than one story, but that just escaped just in the nick of time before their star blew up. Okay, our star is not going to blow up, but it will die. All right, we know this. And we can say approximately when, in about 5 billion years, it will expand and render Earth a burnt cinder as we descend and vaporize into it. Oh, but it's a perfect world to you. So you can cherry pick what goes on in this universe, find all the nice things and the beautiful things and say, oh, I love this. It must be divinely created. Or you can be honest about what you bring forward and then reassess what's going on. You can still say there's a God, but that God has to have some vindictive elements to him, some really Old Testament wrath, if you want to say that there is a God responsible for it all.
Yeah, or he's a hands-off God. Sure, I get it.
Okay, but then, all right, so if you're deistic, I think is the right word there. Our founding fathers were deists that set the world into motion and then backed up and let things go. But then what is your need to have someone create it?
Right.
Why not let that be a mystery and see what the methods and tools of science will bring to bear on it? And so I don't have a problem if you want to invoke God that explains everything. Go ahead. You're no longer useful in the laboratory, right? Because any mystery to you is just, well, God made that. And you're not there with me trying to figure out the causes and effects of things. Yeah. You could also say, and by the way, there are many religious scientists, and this is primarily their posture. You could also say, I want to learn how God put the universe together. I want to learn the laws of physics and chemistry, and that's the handiwork of God. I have no problem with that. Go right ahead. And if you get inspiration thinking that way, by the way, inspiration can come from anywhere. You don't deduce the nature of the world from something that you see before it. There's induction and deduction. Those words, I don't even like them. Mm-hmm. I'd rather be more free form about describing how to come up with a new idea. It's like you can be on a toilet. You could be, watching a cartoon. It doesn't matter where the idea comes from. Test it, and if it works, we're good. And if you feel that God put these laws into place and you want to find the handiwork of God, go right ahead if that inspires you.
I guess some of my
and by the way, if you look at the Bible, if you read the Bible and find a passage and that predicts something about the world and you find that turns out to be true, every scientist would be mining the Bible for just that purpose.
Yeah. I guess
previous efforts of people to make that happen have failed miserably.
Yeah.
To say, well, here's some passage in the Bible. That means this will be true in the world. Let's go investigate. They get the wrong answer every time.
Yeah. I was going to say, I get some of my best ideas in the shower. So then let's apply one more thought on, alien life form. The Navy released, and I think in 2015, some top secret classified, photos and video of some sort of UFO object flying really fast. And, the Navy filmed it. I think I know your answer to this, but talk about the probability of us interacting with an alien life form of some sort of higher intelligent alien life. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, let me reshape your question. Okay. So one of them is, what are all these unidentified flying objects? I don't know. They're intriguing. Yeah. I think people who like chasing UFOs should keep chasing them and maybe bring a net next time and snare one and bring it into town square. I would ask different questions, not what is the probability that these are actually aliens. By the way, ask any one of me or my professional colleagues the likelihood of there being life out there in the universe. We think it's pretty high.
Right.
Intelligent life, it's a little more complicated, but maybe that's high as well. No problem agreeing with that. So, but now we should ask, what is the probability? If you want to think probabilities, by the way, in science, we don't generally speak of probabilities in the way you are invoking it. So probably 387 to 1. What does that even,
Sure.
are we placing bets here? What do we do? All right.
Yeah.
So
Likelihood. Let's use a different.
The way to think of it. Yeah. It's just the way to think about it, I think, is what are the chances that an actual alien in a spaceship would visit Earth and only reveal itself to the U.S. Navy, and in so doing be revealed as a fuzzy, monochromatic blob?
Mm-hmm.
What are the chances that aliens visiting Earth would just sort of show up in the sky, move in funny ways, yet you don't have any images of them of high resolution, walking, talking, inviting you? What are the chances of that? And it seems to me that if aliens visited Earth, every single person on Earth would know it. I'm just thinking. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't want to be seen, you wouldn't, because they were so advanced, you would never say. We can hide a B-2 bomber in anybody's radar because It's a stealth bomber, and it leaves as I've been told, the radio, it's got the radio footprint of a bumblebee. Okay? We can do that with our primitive 21st century technology.
Yeah.
So now your alien's coming, and you're really advanced, and you get spotted by a farmer in a backyard, or you get or you only reveal yourself to U.S. Navy in flying F-18s. That just feels, it's not ringing true.
Yeah.
And Neil, because we don't know what it is doesn't mean you know what it is. There are mysteries. Yeah. Maybe the Navy will figure out what the hell they were filming. And if they were aliens, more power to them. But figure out a way to get them next time.
Neil, can I ask you, is our government smart enough to tap your big brain and bring you in to consult on things like this? Are you secretly advising, I won't tell anyone if you are, organizations who are trying to solve important questions like this?
I guess in principle, yes. Let me say it two ways. The government is not, my read of the government is that it is incompetent, that the government is not competent enough to find aliens, capture them, and stockpile them without other people knowing about it. Okay?
Yeah.
It is incapable of keeping that a secret. I just want you to, okay? What, no one's going to sneak a TikTok video out of Area 51 do you think that's not going to if it's actually happening? Do you really think that? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you are giving our government way more high grades and competence than it deserves. Second, I have been tapped by the U.S. government. I was tapped by George Bush, W. Bush, 3 times, 2 White House commissions, and a 3rd time on a committee serving the National Science Foundation to recommend people who would win the Presidential Medal of Science. That's a ceremony at the White House awarded by the president. The press generally doesn't cover that. I think they should, but they don't, because they think it's a partisan political thing, but it's not. So it's unfortunate that we don't know about our own American achievers with the highest award we give a scientist. I've also served on an advisory board of the Pentagon in their Defense Innovation Board. They're revamping all the boards in the new administration, so that board ended. It'll probably resurrect again, but they might have new people on it. But I was a member of that board for 3 years, in the last 3 years. Part of that, part of it over. So I guess I was there longer. Part of it overlapped Obama, and other parts overlapped President Trump. So the answer is yes. I am tapped, as are some of my colleagues, for this as well.
Well, it gives me a certain sense of relief that at least they're trying to, go to good sources and put good people together to think about solving important problems. Maybe the last question I have is, this show, we talk about brands a lot, and maybe you're going to argue with me that, humans are not brands, but I think the rise of the personal brand is a big thing, maybe an opportunity, whether you're an astrophysicist or you're a painter or a dancer. But how would you describe the Neil deGrasse Tyson brand?
Yeah, I never think about it. And I don't even like the term because it implies that you have something to sell. Mm-hmm. And every time you sell it, you want to be spot on to the rules and regulations surrounding a brand. And if there's an urge to go off, no, you got to be put back on track. And that whether or not what I am and what I'm doing fulfills that, I can tell you at no time am I thinking about it in that way. So maybe that's the more honest reply for you. So if after you see everything that I've done, you want to call it a brand, I'm not going to stop you. But I do what I think I have the ability and or the talent to do to shape a better tomorrow for our culture and for civilization. And there are things I do best, and I bring that to the public. My Twitter stream has hardly any self-promotion in it. Maybe 1 in 100 tweets or something might have mentioned one of my books, and that's only to thank people for their interest. It's not to sell the book. I don't tell people what to do. Watch this, go here, watch me here. This is not, I'm just an educator. If you look at my postings, they're there to educate you, to give you a perspective that you can add to whatever are the opinions that you're trying to formulate. People might think that I'm opinionated, but if you look carefully at what I post, they're not opinions. They're perspectives, they're outlooks. I once tweeted that Walmart, the world's largest gun seller, mm-hmm. At Walmart, the world's largest gun seller, you can buy an AR-51 rifle, but company policy bans the sale of pop music with curse words. That was the tweet. Okay, that's a simple fact.
Yeah.
And I watched people saying, what do you mean? Of course, they should be allowed to sell guns if they wanted to. How can you? And no time did I say they couldn't or shouldn't sell guns.
Right.
I didn't say they couldn't or should sell curse words. I just contrasted these two facts. And the response split between the people thinking I'm attacking the First Amendment and the people thinking I'm attacking the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. So they layered their own lens onto factual information I presented. And I was intrigued by that. And I've been intrigued ever since. At my level of following, social media following, for that level of following with others, they're pundits. Yeah. And they get, you look at Al Gore and you look at former the late Rush Limbaugh, you look at Hannity, you look at Rachel Maddow. They're pumping a political platform.
Right.
And that's not what I do. So in that sense, I don't think I have my brand is education. Call it that.
Yeah.
And trying to make it as fun and as interesting for you as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Let's call that a brand.
Do you want to ask me what I think the Neil deGrasse Tyson brand is?
Oh, what's that?
Well, so I'm with you. I would take the capitalism right out of, meanings are in people, not in the words themselves, right? So if you're feeling like the word brand has a lot of capitalism baked into it, I would remove it all. I think, a lot of people get confused about what a brand is. A brand is not your product or service. A brand is not, the advertising or even the message. Although advertising, and publicity can help amplify your brand, that's not a brand. A brand is really, I think, what other people think and feel about you based on an experience they have with you, whether they have read one of your books, heard one of your speeches, read one of your tweets. And in so doing, then, if you have millions or billions of these touch points, you may or may not have varying degrees of interpretation of what your brand is. I think what we can do as a personal brand, for example, is really just live our truth, to be authentic, to try and be ourselves and do as much as we can to align our mission and I heard you kind of crystallize it by saying, I'm an educator. You want to educate people to find truth or to find,
objective truths. Yeah.
Yeah. Objective truths. I think, the more that
I think that's fair. If I can stay authentic to that mission statement, we can think of that mission statement as a brand.
Yeah.
By the way, since you like the word brand, do you know the origin of the usage of the word that way? It has a fascinating origin.
Well, I'm only thinking back to like a cattle.
No.
Brand.
So that is a brand, but that has nothing to do with marketing a brand. So it has to do with wine. Did you know this?
I didn't. I was just thinking back to the cattle days when you literally put.
No. Okay, so here's what happened. So in Portugal, they had new trademark regulations that allowed you to protect the port you were making, and they would grow the port grapes and make port wine up on the slopes up the Douro River, and then it would be carried down this river on these long rafts. And before they put in locks and things, it was quite treacherous. And occasionally these barrels would fall over and people would grab them and you wouldn't know who they belonged to because they would be floating. And so once the laws enabled people to create a trademark that would identify their, and you could protect that trademark, Sandeman Port decided they would take their trademark and brand it onto their barrels with a hot iron.
Yep.
And so they'll say, well, what is that? Oh, that's our brand. It was a literal brand, which then became conjoined with the concept of a trademark.
At what time period is this? What are we talking about?
Oh, gosh, when was that? Late 1700s, maybe?
Okay.
Maybe earlier. I think the 1700s is when that took place. Well, so that's otherwise a brand is a brand and a trademark is a trademark, right? But when does a trademark become a brand? When they used the same tools that you would brand cows with.
Yeah, it makes me think of like the king's seal of the, when you put the wax on the envelope and you send out a decree and it'd have their mark on it, and very interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's before you had lickable envelopes.
Right.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. No. It's all about the journey. Ain't nothing changed but the weather. The dangling carrot that hang from the rear view. Your dreams in the past ain't nowhere near you. Backseat drivers got nothing but 2 cents. Shotgun riders too biased, they all liars. I should get an A for effort. I'm